conversation today, hosted by the James Irvine Foundation with the USC Schwarzenegger Institute. I am so excited about this discussion that we're going to have. But before we get to our guests who are joining us here today, we do have a little treat for you, a very special guest who decided to drop in via video. Let's take a look.
Excited that the day we have this conference. And the reason why I'm excited about it is because it's with the Irvine Foundation. Yes, that's right. The USC Schwarzenegger Institute is joining the Irvine Foundation and have this wonderful conference where everyone is coming together and talking about the same issues to make California a better place to live and a healthier place to live. So I'm so excited about that. Congratulations, good luck with the conference, and I'll be back.
Thank you so much, Governor Schwarzenegger, for that. And of course, everyone knows who Arnold Schwarzenegger is. For those who might not be totally familiar with the James Irvine Foundation, it's an organization with a very simple and yet a very laudable goal, which is ensuring all low-income workers throughout California really have the power to advance economically and make it here in our state. And they do this through strategic investments and partnerships with all sorts of groundbreaking leaders, some of whom we're going to hear from today, as well as organizations. The foundation really believes in empowering Californians who are making a big difference. And when you look at this past year and change, these leaders were tested in ways that they never could have imagined that they would be. There was, of course, most notably the COVID-19 pandemic, which brought about great economic hardship. There was also destructive wildfires, and of course, a long overdue but very necessary racial reckoning that happened throughout this country. And the community leaders on whom all of us rely really had to step it up in ways that they had never done before to deliver results at a crucial and critical time. And so that is the theme of our conversation today, leadership when it matters most. And we have three phenomenal leaders with us today. Thanks to the pandemic, they are here with us virtually. All of them are previous James Irvine Foundation Leadership Award recipients who work with a distinct underserved community, including older workers, unhoused Californians, and small businesses that might not be able to access traditional financing. All of these communities were, of course, tremendously affected by the pandemic, and I can't wait to hear what our leaders today have to say about how they were able to specifically address these very urgent needs. But before we get into our conversation, I want to take a moment to introduce Program Officer Cindy Downing, who can share a bit more about leadership when it matters most. Cindy.
Thank you, Alex, and good morning, everyone. I don't know about all of you, but I think that I have a Terminator movie marathon in store for me this weekend. As Alex said, I'm Cindy Downing, and I'm honored to be here today on behalf of the James Irvine Foundation to welcome you to this conversation with three very innovative California leaders who have previously received our Leadership Award. I want to also take a moment to thank the USC Schwarzenegger Institute for their partnership in organizing this event today and for their work to make California a more informed state. Today's event is a part of our larger effort called Leadership When It Matters Most, and it spotlights Irvine Foundation's Leadership Award alumni who have pivoted their work to, as Alex said, address the COVID-19 pandemic and other unexpected challenges and continue to serve their communities. I think we can all agree that 2020 put California leaders to the test in ways unlike before, and the path forward was far from clear, with shifting county and state restrictions to business and gatherings and limited resources to meet the increasing and really dire needs. These three nonprofit leaders gathered here today, they may work in different fields or regions, but they've all navigated one of the hardest years in recent memory and made tangible differences in the lives of Californians. Through her organization, encore.org, Eunice Lynn Nichols works with older adults to empower themselves in the workplace. This work is even more important during a year when COVID-19 took a severe toll on older adults. In September, Eunice responded by launching the Gen to Gen Innovation Fellowship, bringing older and younger generations together to fight social isolation. Doniece Sandoval's organization, LavaMaeÄnn's, provides showers, essential care services, and dignity to our growing unhoused population. As the pandemic ravaged many unhoused communities, she went above and beyond to make a difference. Doniece ensured that LavaMaeÄnn's clients, whom they refer to as guests, were not overlooked. And Eric Weaver, the founder and now board member of Accion Opportunity Fund, provides microloans to small businesses who are often shut out of accessing conventional loans from banks. As you can imagine, his efforts increase racial equity in California's business community and help open doors to economic independence. During a year when so many small businesses suffered from virus-related closures, organizations like Eric's provided a lifeline. I know you will find these three leaders as inspiring and dynamic as I do. And quickly before I hand it over to Alex, I would be remiss in not acknowledging and sharing appreciation for Capital Impact, who is now fully managing the awards program in partnership with the Irvine Foundation and has been instrumental in putting this event together today. So thank you all for being here with us, and especially so close to lunchtime. So I would like to also give a reminder to please take time to take care of yourselves, do what you need while we hear from these wonderful leaders. So with that, I will hand it back to Alex. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy, so much. And I want to also give a thanks to all the folks joining us today from so many great philanthropic organizations. As a journalist, I have all sorts of questions for our three distinguished leaders, but I want to let our audience know as well that we welcome your inquiries to either an individual on our panel or all three of them. If you want to share your question, you can use the Q&A link that's at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many of them in the time that we have. So my first question, which is a huge question in a lot of ways, but especially highlighting what Cindy just said about how the communities that you all have continued to do work with were some of those that were hardest hit by this pandemic. How did your organization adapt over this past year and change? And Eunice, let's begin with you.
Thanks, Alex. I think this has been a tough year for nonprofit social sector leaders across the board to have to pivot so quickly, often with limited resources. The good thing is most of us have spent our entire professional lives learning to be scrappy. I remember the moment when things started to shut down, and I happened to be in a community call that was a combination of older social change leaders and some young social change leaders. We've been doing a lot of intergenerational work. And in that in that moment, for people who are doing intergenerational work, it kind of felt like the rug was being pulled out from under us with two populations that felt like they were the most vulnerable, older adults because of the health risks, and then young people because it was unclear what was going to happen with schooling and education and ability to support them having appropriate lives as kids. And so I think two things. One, we were both in a moment of feeling like we might need to pull back and create space for people just to handle their personal lives. And we did that like a lot of the rest of the world with our staff internally and with some of our programming. And then we started to ask questions, like we were about to launch this Gen to Gen Innovation Fellowship to support social change leaders who are bringing older and younger together to make the world a better place. And we were going to delay that for a few months. And then we had this thought, there's actually not been a more urgent time than now to invest in innovation and bringing older and younger together with a whole new set of challenges around how we will physically connect people in a time of physical distancing. So we fast-tracked that, and we ended up launching this fellowship as was described in the intro in the last fall. And we have 15 social entrepreneurs that are re-envisioning how to use technology to connect old and young, how to still have in-person gatherings that focus on racial reckoning and bringing older adults and young people together to deal with our racist past. We have innovators that are working on affordable housing and how to actually help solve some of the problems that older and younger people are together facing with inability to stay in cities and work. And all of that's being done virtually. And I'll say one of the things that we're excited about is that launching the fellowship during the pandemic has allowed us to actually create a format for cohorting our fellows that is more accessible for social entrepreneurs that are working parents or who are taking care of somebody else at home and they can do it from their home. We have people who probably couldn't have applied for a fellowship because of travel costs or other burdens and hurdles. And so we do want to go back to in-person gatherings in support of our leaders, but right now we're leaning into the benefits that the virtual format offers us.
As a working parent, I commend you for that. I thank you on behalf of all working parents out there. It has been a very challenging year. Doniece, let's move over to you, and maybe you could share some of the ways that you and your colleagues have made it through this incredibly challenging year.
Absolutely. As Cindy mentioned, one of our core programs is bringing showers and toilets on wheels to people who are unhoused. And as the pandemic struck, there was so little information about transmission that was clear. One of the things that we were the most concerned about was not further increasing the risk of the health of an already incredibly health vulnerable population. And so the team got together and discussed this and made the very difficult decision to temporarily suspend showers, which was really painful. But they also were so committed to continuing to create, continuing the contact and connection, because really the secret sauce of LavaMaessz's service is, of course, the programs that we offer, the services we offer, but it is a way that we offer them, which is about radical hospitality, about treating people with extraordinary care, creating a sense of belonging that is so important to personal resilience. So the team quickly scrambled together and decided that they were going to begin encampment visits and drop hygiene kits. And in doing that, they were hearing from our guests and other people on the street that were new to serving that a lot of the nonprofits had just a sort of suspended services altogether, and people were not getting what they needed. And one of the biggest challenges, even though the cities where we provide services were trying to get hand washing stations out, there weren't enough. And they weren't being monitored every single day to make sure that they were in good working condition, that there was soap, that there was water. So the team gathered again and said, innovation is at the core of what we do too, but then thinking about programs, we heard from our guests that they don't have access to hand washing. So the team created a model, tested it, created a toolkit. And then one of the other parts of our program is not only providing direct service, but now that the organization is a nonprofit accelerator, it's working with communities around the world who are implementing LavaMaessz's design programs. So the toolkit went global, and the team now is continuing to work in that vein, but to have access for our guests to hand washing stations and all of that has meant, and then to also then go back and see how they're being used, sometimes as bird bath showers, sometimes as the only source of drinking water for people. The team now is working on other new models and prototypes for creating, very mobile solutions that can be placed in encampments to meet drinking water needs, to do pop-up showers and things like that. And then again, turning that into a toolkit. So I think the pandemic in some ways is as horrific as it has been, especially in terms of affecting, more deeply affecting, or as Cindy said, so perfectly ravaging already for vulnerable populations. For an organization like ours, it was an opportunity to continue to look at and to talk to the people we serve and understand what we need, and then nimbly, begin to innovate and develop new tools and resources, and then share those out broadly by creating toolkits.
And there were some very tangible results of that as well early on in the pandemic. I know from talking to a lot of people who do this work, there were just huge concerns about potential high rates of transmission among our unhoused neighbors. And it turns out that it wound up not quite being that case. And I'm sure in no small part to the work that you and your colleagues have been doing. Eric Weaver, let's pivot to you and hear a little bit about the work that you have been doing throughout this pandemic and how it has changed.
Yeah, well, for us, Alex, the pandemic was literally an existential event, like a life-threatening event, because for ourselves and for our clients. Imagine being owed over $100 million by thousands of tiny small businesses that were having to shut down. So that was scary, but fortunately, we started in a fairly strong financial position, and our donors and partners really stepped up for us. So we were actually able to quickly raise money to do payment forgiveness and deferrals. And I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but it was, thousands of clients that we forgave, a couple payments, moved them to the end, let them skip a few, things like that. We also got into the grant business for a while, giving away money to just businesses in the city of San Jose. And we did a lot of online education about how to pivot to respond to COVID. We had over 10,000 small business owners attend our webinars around figuring out how to pivot. But probably the biggest change was, we stopped any new sort of conventional lending, not that our lending is that conventional. And, everyone was focused on the PPP program when that was announced. And I can say a lot about the pros and cons of the PPP program, but it was what we had. Unfortunately, we did not at that time have a relationship with the SBA. We just for, business reasons, we weren't an SBA lender. And that meant we were shut out of the first round. We couldn't get, PPP loans for our clients. And this was, fortunately, we were able to sort of work with some partners. I'll say more about that in a little bit, but I'm super proud of what the organization accomplished with PPP. Really quickly, just some stats for you. Nationally, 78% of PPP loans went to men, businesses owned by men. In our case, it was 57%, with 43% going to women, which is higher than the proportion that women business owners are, even though they're growing faster than men. But nationally, 83% of PPP loans went to white business owners, whereas our PPP borrowers were 36% white, and that's much higher than our typical situation. And then finally, the average loan size of a PPP loan nationally, this is as of August, it may have changed a little bit because they did improve some things, but nationally it was over $100,000, meaning it's going to the bigger businesses. Our average loan size was $14,000. And just one final thing on PPP, there were a lot of things that were not great about it, but it was structured so that the lender was paid by getting a percentage of the loan amount, regardless of the size of the loan. So lenders were incredibly incentivized to make the biggest loans they could, and the banks made tons of money on PPP. A $14,000 loan with a 3% fee, it doesn't even come close. So we got that changed in the next round, and I'm proud that some of us advocated to get that changed. And more of the small dollars are flowing to very small businesses now.
That's great. And thank you for sharing those statistics. I think it's really important to understand, especially, the devil's in the details, as they say, especially around the PPP program. Eunice, I think one of the things that this pandemic definitely revealed is how we as a society feel about and treat the elderly. And I think that there were some very real and very serious concerns, especially at the beginning when resources were so limited, really kind of an unveiling of how we felt about those at the later years of their life, and maybe how expendable we as a society saw them. I'm curious, I mean, if this is stuff that you certainly knew was going on long before all this began, but were there any surprises for you in seeing what this pandemic revealed? And was there something within this that you've been able to use as an opportunity to really use as a catalyst to get people rethinking about how we value this portion of our population?
Yeah, what a great question. I think there have been a couple things that we've really dug into in the last year and a half or so. One is, I think it's very common for us, and appropriately so, to look at our older populations and look at how we've isolated them socially, physically, segregated them from all kinds of spaces. And it's no surprise, therefore, that a lot of the research shows that a quarter of the people over the age of 60 are living alone in the US, and 40% of them report feeling lonely. I think what the pandemic has really highlighted is that they're not the only lonely population, that actually our youngest generations report the highest rates of loneliness. And then with the pandemic hitting and them shifting into a very isolated physical stance, many for the first time, that we have these bookends of our populations that are experiencing, in some ways, a similar situation. And for us, part of that has been all the more important to connect older and younger people together to be the solution for each other's isolation and loneliness. The other piece is, I think we've been concerned that a lot of, once again, rightful concerns about the health and well-being of older adults has caused us to look at, to use a narrative of older adults being frail, of older adults being kind of sidelined from being part of the solution. And we recently launched something called the Intergenerational Vaccine Corps that was motivated by, one, there was an article Mitt Romney wrote calling for retired physicians to come back after getting vaccinated to help expand vaccination programs. And then there was a separate article that we saw that where somebody was asking for college students to be mobilized to support a lot of the logistical pieces of getting people vaccinated. And we ended up writing a Newsweek op-ed calling on an intergenerational vaccine corps. Why have these separate initiatives? What if older and younger actually work together as a team to work on this urgent issue? And we ended up in 6 weeks going from an idea to an actual launch with 8 community centers in the Bay Area, 8 community health centers, engaging retired doctors and nurses and medical professionals to support vaccination. And then these younger volunteers doing things like contact tracing or post-vaccination monitoring and community outreach. And so we're just using this moment to try and showcase both the fact that there's vulnerability, but there's also great strength and resilience and opportunity to engage the talents of both generations in solving some of these really big problems.
And I just want to, again, welcome anybody who's just joining us, and to let you know, if you're watching us live, we welcome your questions, which you can submit in the Q&A section. Doniece, again, much like we just spoke about with Eunice, I think that this pandemic has really revealed many of the things that we knew for a while, but maybe just truly revealed the depth of them. And when it comes to the homelessness crisis, I think there has always long been such a priority put on a shelter, a roof over a head, that a lot of times everybody forgets the kind of wider network and matrix of services that are also so important. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your work on that front, your experience, and how that applies to what we have seen over the past year.
Absolutely. I think, as you said, especially more and more, so much of the focus is around we need, whether it's shelters or permanent housing for people. And we've always believed that, yes, that is absolutely right, that, that is a huge priority. But the problem or the challenge is that it takes so long to create new shelter and space for people. Although during the pandemic, you did see communities hustle to place people in hotels. I think California did a wonderful job doing that. And many of the communities had a very successful program and are now looking at how to make that more permanent. But it doesn't get everyone, and it doesn't get everyone quickly. So what happens when you're still on the street? These services are called emergency services, and I get it, but on some level, it has always baffled me. I've always thought of them personally as resiliency services, right? What you're trying to do is hold people in such a place that they're not continuing to spiral downward, and providing these important services like access to a shower and to a toilet that brings dignity and that allows people to to reconnect with their sense of self-worth, and with the people that are serving them as well, provide that sense of community, which is so important. I think during the pandemic, what we saw more and more is that there were an increasing number of communities across the country reaching out to us to say, oh my gosh, you've got hand washing stations. We want those not only because we want to provide a service, but we want it to be sort of an anchor for the community, for our nonprofit or our organization to be out there to stay connected with people, to create a sense of belonging and reduce that sense of isolation. Because I agree exactly. I think the elders in our community and the very young obviously suffer loneliness and isolation, but talk about a population that feels invisible, marginalized, and basically, any community you go to, there is this belief that whoever their unhoused population is not from that community, that they've come from somewhere else, even though all of the research shows that 70% plus are people who became unhoused where they are. And so these resiliency services, not only vital to provide food and clothing and showers and on the ground, medical support and care, but they're just really vital in order to help people maintain a sense, a shred sometimes of well-being and belonging, so that they can hold in place, so that they can maintain a sense of hope, so that when housing or shelter opens up, that they are ready to move in and upwards into the next stage.
It's interesting that so much of this past year has been so consumed with issues of health in the most basic sense, the most public sense. And yet this past year has also been a time of great financial transformation. Eric, as you know better than I, everything from people investing in Robinhood to now the even the ties in between public health and people making cashless payments. But the fact that my mother now knows how to Venmo is a huge and extraordinary thing that I don't think would have happened had it not been for this pandemic. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the changes and transformation that you have seen in the micro-lending community that might have been born out of these big changes that are happening in the world of finances overall.
Yeah, I'll talk sort of about how advances in financial technology have transformed microlending. The biggest change is they've just sped it up. You can now go online. Well, pre-pandemic, you could go online, enter a little bit of information, and have a loan approval in 5 minutes, and have money in your account, possibly even the next day, maybe 2 days, which sounds great, and it is great for small businesses because they often do need money in a fairly fast way. Unfortunately, a lot of that's been developed is structured in very opaque, confusing ways where the actual pricing is obscured, and people are taking out loans that they absolutely cannot afford. And then they're taking out another loan because they ran out of money from the first loan, and they're taking out another loan, and the lender's charging them a fee each time. And it's essentially a payday loan for small businesses. And there's a product called a merchant cash advance that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry now, but most Americans have never heard of it. But if you run a small business and you accept credit cards, or if you have a business bank account, they will find you and they will bombard you with offers for fast cash. So speeding things up, and the customer service and convenience is fantastic. I mean, it's a great customer experience. It's just a lousy product. What we've tried to do as an organization is to compete as best we can with that, and we've adopted a whole lot of new technology to speed up our underwriting. We're lending to people that we never meet, which CDFIs never used to do. But we can now verify their identity with all these fancy, web-based products that can tell you they're for real. We have a partnership with one of the more responsible online lending companies, which is a company called Lending Club, where they are actually screening people that come to them looking for a small business loan. And if they meet our criteria, which is more generous than lending clubs, they give them an instant approval from us, which is transformational for a CDFI. I think, but at the end of the day, like, technology is just what you make of it. I mean, it always seems to have an upside and a dark side. I think we can all, speak to that from our own lives with social media or whatever it is. So there's no panacea in technology, but used wisely, it can absolutely help you reach more clients and serve them better, as long as your heart's in the right place.
I'd like to talk about where all three of you are at in this current moment, because it feels like we are at a very important and critical turning point. Thankfully, due to vaccine rollouts and declining cases and hospitalizations, things are looking better, but we're certainly not out of the woods yet. And I'm curious to hear from each of you. And let's just to mix it up, Doniece, let's go to you this time first. What is the biggest challenge that you're facing right now?
So LavaMaeÄnn's made a strategic pivot at the very beginning of 2020 that was going swimmingly until the pandemic hit, of course. And that was really sort of continuing our direct service on a slightly smaller model, but really focusing on serving the replication community. Essentially, we had, 500 communities around the world knocking at our door, asking us to help them create their own LavaMaeÄnn design programs. And some of them just needed toolkits, others need a little bit of mentorship, but many of them needed much more training. And in thinking about, the ultimate goal was to see this service available wherever it was needed. Obviously, the way to do it would be to share the model, to open source as much as we possibly could. So what the organization is doing right now is really trying to build a network of replicators to create capacity to meet the need in that way, bring them online. And it was going to be more of a in the real world, but it's really all focused 100% online now, to go through trainings, to share best practices, to look at how we pool funding to create startup capital for new communities, so that this may spread. And so I think what that means in terms of the challenge for LavaMaeÄnn's is, one, this is new. It's like, I just read an article in SSIR about, Engine 1, which is your core program and business and what you do. And Engine 2 is this new model to help increase impact. And so this is all new for us. And so there's a lot of the iterative process of refining the program and getting it right and learning from the failures, embracing them and seeing them as growth opportunities. But it also comes down to kind of a funding model. So, for 6.5 years, LavaMaeÄnn was funded by people who wanted to make it possible for LavaMaeÄnn's to directly deliver showers or pop-up care villages or whatever that was. And now there's still some of that going on, but what LavaMaeÄnn's is doing is becoming, this accelerator. It's teaching the world, and so finding the right partners, whether they be foundations or private individuals or even corporate partners to make that happen, is, I think, one of the most interesting challenges facing the organization to ensure sustainability, while also, leaving lots of opportunity to think about how the organization could also generate its own revenue to meet its needs, but also then create seed funding for the replication community as well. So that's, a conversation that is ongoing. We're exploring a lot of different paths and avenues, including innovating around a pop-up shower that could be packaged up in pallets and sold into emergency response departments and communities across the country, so that when fires happen or hurricanes happen, They are not having to try and persuade organizations like ours to leave their guests in the lurch and come serve, their community, or being rooked by, the mobile shower retail rental companies that are charging them exorbitant amounts of money, but that they would have their own resource that we would be able to build and develop and source with them to meet their needs in a humane, cost-effective, and efficient way that would then, help LavaMaeÄx be financially sustainable as well.
Eric, let's turn to you. Biggest challenge that you're facing in this current chapter?
This was a tough one because there are so many. But I think the problem that my organization that I founded and now sort of lovingly advise it is how to get meaningful amounts of capital in a responsible form and an affordable form to disadvantaged small business owners, particularly small business owners of color. And to really address this problem, I mean, we need entities with very deep pockets that are ready to take some risk. And I think there's in the CDFI community lending world, we may have done ourselves, I don't know, a little bit of a disservice in that, in our ardor to show that people of color are just as creditworthy as everybody else, we always tout our amazing repayment rates and, Muhammad Eunice, the poor always repay back, and that's a bit like, that's also limiting us from getting to the scale we need to get to. The reality is that people who have faced historic discrimination and systemic racism and sexism do not have as much money, do not have had financial challenges in the past, not because of their character, but because they lack financial resources and lack a fallback. So if you want to really lend money and give money, I'm all in favor of giving money to people in that situation, you're gonna have to. Some of them aren't going to be able to repay because of the nature of their lives and their businesses. But 9 out of 10 will, and that's 9 people that have really gotten a chance to get ahead. So we need the SBA to take more risk. The SBA's losses, it's very hard to get data out of them, but it's probably around 3 to 4%. And they're supposed to be the entity that enables banks to take more risk. The Fed, maybe we need the Fed to somehow get involved in lending to very small businesses. The big banks, I mean, the big banks have us all absolutely just convinced that they just can't lend to small businesses owned by people. They just can't do it because it's so risky. But they take risk all the time, and they almost crash the economy. I mean, they not too long ago, they'll take risk for profit, which I understand. I went to business school, I get it, risk return, all that. But we need to be willing to take risk for social justice and economic justice. And I'd really, and like banks provide all kinds of services to people they don't make money on. They don't make money on most checking accounts. They don't make money, but they have this franchise granted to them by the government that enables them to have deposit insurance, and that's a license to make money. So let's make them lend some money to people that the loans are small and the income might not be great, but those are my thoughts.
Those are all really important thoughts. We are coming to the home stretch, so I want to field a question from the audience and pose it to all 3 of you. Eunice, Lynn, let's start with you. What gives you the most hope right now as you look forward?
I love that question. So I feel like the pandemic is putting us in a place where we have a unique opportunity, in particular, as we focus on coming out of this. I think we have a younger generation that will be forever changed by growing up in the midst of this. And I think that a lot of the questions that they are seeing us as adults answer will shape them as a generation. And that includes things like, are we actually treating each other like extended family? Are we seeing the assets of older and younger together, and the power of what happens when the older and younger, and I think as Doniece said, the invisibles, are actually seen as a critical part of the solution? And so I am hopeful when I see so many examples, whether it be young people in Oakland who, when the Asian hate crimes were happening, rose up and said, we will be matched with elders and go walk with them to the grocery store to make sure they can do that safely. When I see these retired nurses coming out of a comfortable retirement to say, I will risk myself to go and help get other people vaccinated, that gives me hope. When I see young people who are actually for the first time having conversations with older activists saying, let's not do social change alone, let's actually learn from our history and engage in the work together, that gives me hope. And so I think one message I would have for the audience that's listening here is we have so many siloed practices, policies, funding streams that don't allow us to bring together older and younger and others into the solution in intersectional ways. And I think one thing we've learned from the pandemic is we can't fix the things that are broken because of our siloed behavior with siloed solutions. So I have hope when funders and policymakers also get in the game and think about crossing these divides and generating solutions together.
That's great. And Eric, how about you? What's giving you the most hope right now?
You know, it's going to sound kind of maybe I don't know, too mainstream or something, but the Biden administration is giving me hope. You know, there are a lot of things that are wrong that really only the federal government can make a dent in, and you know they're going to spend some money, and certainly in my space they're spending a lot of money. And I was just talking about risk. There's an initiative called the State Small Business Credit Initiative that happened after the Great Recession. It was very impactful in getting small businesses, you know, running again. And there's even more money this time around for that. You know, I'd say just, yeah, I'll just, that is where I have some hope that resources are going to come to us in a way they haven't a long time.
I think that's something to be very hopeful about. And Doniece, will let you be the final word here. What is giving you the most hope at this particular juncture?
You know, I think it sort of builds off of what Eunice said in terms of, you know, people stepping up because they have been so moved. I think we've all been shaken to our core because of what has happened during this pandemic. And it has really pushed people to open their eyes and look around and see, you know, how many challenges there are that face us, and that they have a role to play. I mean, I think a lot about what John F. Kennedy said in his Ask Not speech. You know, it's like, what is the opportunity for us to be making a difference? And so, you know, we've always been fortunate to have corporations of various sizes step up to support our work, but there's been even more of an influx and a real sense of authentic wanting to partner, not just like dropping some money and using our logo, but really thinking thoughtfully about what their role can be, including, you know, educating their employees around the issue of homelessness and all of the myths so that they can begin to change the conversation. But also on the replicator side, the number of communities, people waking up and saying, oh my gosh, we want to bring showers because we recognize, we've looked around and we see there's nothing for the people in our community. So that number really exploding, which I think is incredibly powerful. So I think, you know, as you look across the spectrum from small to large, a lot of people have, you know, woken up. And my real hope is that awakening stays alive, that we don't lose it, that once whatever the new normal ultimately looks like, we don't all go back to sleep and stay in our little silos, that this intergenerational, interracial, everything stays dynamic and just robust and beautiful, because there's where the opportunity, really the sweet spot lies. And like Eric, I think the Biden administration is the right administration for now and can be a catalyst, a continuing catalyst for all of this.
What great words to wrap up our conversation with Doniece and Eric and Eunice. I want to really sincerely thank all three of you for sharing your insights, your challenges, and your hope with us. I really appreciate it. And we're going to turn now to this afternoon's keynote speaker, Senior Advisor on Social Innovation to Governor Gavin Newsom, Kathleen Kelly Janus, who is a social entrepreneur, an expert on philanthropy, scaling startups, and millennial engagement. And she's an author and lecturer at Stanford University. Super busy lady. So we really appreciate her taking the time to speak with us. California is not only a huge economy, it's an innovative one. And it's leaders like Kathleen who have made it this way. It's her strategic thinking and ability to connect the dots, working with leaders across both public and private sectors. And that's what makes California works. And she's doing all this at a time that really demands clear thinking. We're so very lucky to have her. I'm going to turn over the virtual stage to Kathleen Kelly Janus.
Thank you so much, Alex, and thank you for that lovely introduction. It's truly an honor to be here with you and to be with these engaging panelists and the team at the James Irvine Foundation. Thank you, Cindy, for such an incredible event, and a big thank you to the USC Schwarzenegger Institute. Always a treat to hear from our former governor. And Eunice, Eric, and Doniece, you inspire me so much. I think that one of the biggest privileges of serving the state during COVID has been to see innovative leaders like you step up during these challenging times. And it hasn't been easy, and you've done it all with grace and with the innovative frame that you mentioned. And I think this spirit is going to carry us for a long time. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see if I can do this right. Let's see here. Oh, okay. Perfect. So I wanted to start with a story from a couple of years ago. A junior at Stanford University approached me about a nonprofit that she wanted to start. She wanted to help people in the slums of Cape Town. And I said, great, how often do you go to South Africa? And she responded, oh, I've never been, but I hope to go one day. So here you have this student who was so, I think, well-intentioned. She was certainly smart. She was motivated. But how can you solve a problem that you have never seen? How can you design problems for people that you've never met? She had developed a solution without taking the time to actually do the deep work to gain an understanding of the problem. And she is not alone. When the Camp Fire struck the town of Paradise in 2018, it wiped out 11,000 homes and killed 85 people overnight. The generosity of the American people was overwhelming. They donated millions of dollars to the victims. They shipped supplies to the regions, but sometimes their efforts to help weren't actually that helpful. So many people got into their cars to volunteer that they clogged the roads with traffic, and they filled heaps of clothing in parking lots that people had sent. And actually the town had to rent huge semi-trucks to carry away all of these clothes that would never get used. These donors meant well, but they didn't take the time to actually understand what the fire victims really needed. From homelessness to the future of work, there's no shortage of issues that we need to solve. And the good news is, as you've heard from our incredible speakers today, there's no shortage of people who want to help solve those problems. But here's the thing, good intentions are not enough. And in what I've learned in all of my work is that the lessons for scaling social change are teachable. The problem is that we are not teaching them. And I know a little bit about this from my own experience. When I was 25, this is me just a few years ago, haven't changed. I was a lawyer in San Francisco and I wanted to get involved in my community. And so I spent my days working at the law firm, billing hours. And at night, I started an organization called Spark, which was a group of young professionals fighting for women's rights. In the first couple of months, we were growing like crazy. We were doubling our revenue every few months. We had lines around the block for our events. And within just a couple of years, we became the largest network of millennial donors in the world. But just when we hit our stride, we hit a wall. We couldn't raise the more than $500,000 that we needed to grow the organization. So several years later, when I began teaching at Stanford, I became really curious. Who are these organizations that are scaling this wall, and what are they doing that we were not doing at Spark? And I found in my research that this funding wall is real, that in fact, 2/3 of nonprofits are at a budget of $500,000 or below in revenue. So I set out 5 years ago on a mission to answer one question. Why is it that some social startups succeed and scale while others don't? And in fact, I was so passionate about this question, I managed to give birth to 3 babies in the time that I tried to answer it. And I still did the hard work to try and figure it out. I surveyed hundreds of top performing organizations. I traveled all over the US and sat down with 100 nonprofit founders, with their boards, their funders. And in my interviews, I kept waiting for people to say, well, it's just grit or charisma or a good idea that makes someone get ahead. But no one said that, not one. And it's not to say that things like grit and charisma and a great idea aren't all important. Of course they are. But what I did hear again and again is that the strategies that lay the foundation for this breakthrough success break down into 5 different areas. First, testing ideas to get a proof of concept before you go out and scale your organization. No business would launch a product without first testing it, and no nonprofit should either. Second, measuring impact right from the start, not just to prove that what you're doing is working, but to learn along the way and to improve as you grow. Third, fundraising experimentation. If you want to be involved in running a nonprofit, it's going to involve a lot of fundraising, and the best leaders work hard to figure out the right funding model through a combination of earned and philanthropic income. Fourth, leading collaboratively. No one can do this work alone, and the best leaders tap into the talents of their entire teams. And finally, storytelling in compelling ways to draw people into the movement. Great storytelling is really hard, and the nonprofit leaders that succeed focus on learning how to tell their story in a way that is compelling to champions. So these are the 5 essential practices that I wish I had when I co-founded Spark. And they are the practices that my students have been asking me for years. And I believe that if we truly want to scale social problems, we have to be able to teach these lessons to students, to donors, and to nonprofit leaders themselves. So first, we need to educate students. And I want to share a little story of someone that Doniece knows well, Rob Gittin, who was so passionate about the homeless kids that he volunteered with as an undergraduate. He ended up starting an organization in order to serve them. It's called At Their Crossroads. Rob was doing the work that he loved, helping kids on the street one by one by one, when he realized that there were thousands of kids that needed his help. Rob needed to build a movement, but he was only 22. He needed an army of people to help him, but he had never managed anyone before. He was just a young guy. And he didn't have the contacts to high net worth individuals that would help him raise the millions of dollars that he needed to run this organization. He hated the thought of converting his clients into data points, but he knew that somehow he had to measure the impact of his work. Today at the Crossroads is a $2 million organization that has scaled to serving hundreds of homeless youth in San Francisco. But it took Rob 20 years to learn these lessons and a few gray hairs along the way. And I've just heard countless stories of college students like Rob who have very few tools in their toolkit to address the challenges that we know nonprofit work faces. And meanwhile, our sector, which is already so starved for resources, is wasting time while people are learning these lessons on the job. Now, education is changing for the better. The Schwarzenegger Institute is a great example of that. Globally, there's over 300 university-based programs on social entrepreneurship so that students get that on the ground training in the classroom. And at the Stanford program on social entrepreneurship, I teach my class side by side with seasoned social entrepreneurs, Doniece having been one of them. One nonprofit leader, for example, took a group of my students to spend the afternoon in juvenile hall. And when my students met the girls, they quickly realized that they knew very little about the challenges that they faced. While originally my students had wanted to design a mentoring program to help these girls apply for college, once they met them, they realized that the college application process was the least of their worries, that they needed housing and quality academic preparation and jobs to help them support their families while they were in college. So by actually spending time with the community they were trying to help, they realized that you can't design a solution without first deeply understanding the problem. And this is a lesson that will serve them for life. We don't have to wait until kids are in college to teach them. 26% of 16 to 19-year-olds are already volunteering. And we need to prepare those young people to turn that passion into impact. We also need to educate donors, and companies are in a powerful position to do that. For example, 97% of millennials say that they want to apply their skills to their volunteer work, and companies need to listen to that. A couple of years ago, Google, for example, donated $10 million to Goodwill, a job training program to help with technical skills to teach 1 million people. But they didn't just give money, they gave the time of their employees, 1,000 employees, to help with things like career coaching and technical digital skills assistance. So rather than just engaging in one-off volunteer days, companies need to engage the expertise of their employees in the causes that they care about. Companies can also serve as a powerful model for effective giving. As I mentioned, when the campfires hit, although there were many misguided donors, there were also companies that showed tremendous leadership during this time. Companies like Salesforce and Twilio, who partnered with a leading foundation, Tipping Point Community, to hold a concert to raise $33 million for the fire victims. And they encouraged their employees to give by doing a matching program that showed that they could give in ways that was not just the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do from a company's perspective, because customers want to buy products that they feel good about because of the values of the company, and employees want to work for places that they feel proud of. Finally, I think probably most relevant to this group is that we need to invest not just in the nonprofit programs that we care about, but in the incredible leaders that run them. As many of you have experienced, there's a strong trend of foundations refusing to fund overhead costs, things like salaries and executive coaching and other expenses. By some estimates, 80% of philanthropic grants in the United States are restricted. So what does that mean? That is like going to a restaurant and saying, yeah, I'll pay for the food, but I'm not going to pay for the plate or the time of the server to prepare the food. We would never do that. And yet for the nonprofit sector, it's one of the few places that we feel like we can pick and choose what we pay for. We say, yeah, we'll pay for the reading program that teaches the kids to read, but we're not going to pay for the teacher's time or the lesson planning. And we're definitely not paying to measure whether that plan is successful. We're asking our nonprofit leaders, the people who have dedicated their entire lives to addressing some of the most pressing challenges of our time, to solve these problems with one hand tied behind their back. We pay them less, we scrutinize their investment as overhead, we offer them more useless donations than actual skills and expertise, and then we ask them, what's taking you so long to change the world? Funders have to begin to invest in capacity building of organizations, and many foundations are already doing that. A COVID moment with my dog barking at the mailman. Sugar. We all care about making a difference. You wouldn't be here if you didn't. But we have to realize that it's not enough just to teach a kid to read or provide a homeless family with a meal. It isn't enough if we're not actually funding the infrastructure that is required to make those things happen. Imagine a world where nonprofits didn't spend their desperately needed funding on getting rid of misguided donations, where we could roll our sleeves up and work together to solve the challenges that we face. We have to match sugar. We have to match the passion that we see for social change with an investment in the skills and strategies that are needed in order to make an impact. That is how we can turn good intentions into tangible results, and how we can turn feel-good philanthropy into real good, because the problems that we face in our society are too big to wait. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And to that notion of investing in leaders in this world of ours at this critical juncture, I just wanted to give everyone a little nudge to know that right now the Irvine Foundation is accepting nominations for the 2022 Leadership Awards. So we really encourage you to nominate someone in your community. Nominations that reflect the diversity of our population is especially encouraged. The deadline is coming up on May 7th, and if you want more information, please visit irvineawards.org. I really want to thank so much all of our great panelists and speakers today, and I want to thank the USC Schwarzenegger Institute, and last but certainly not least, the James Irvine Foundation. Thank you all so much. Have a great afternoon and a great weekend.